All right, welcome everybody and happy Friday. My name is Piper Hendricks and I'm the Executive Director of Stories Change Power. And for anyone on the call who attended The Ohio State University, bravo, you are embodying the spirit of bipartisanship and bridge building that we center here at Stories Change Power. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you didn't recognize the University of Michigan fight song. But that is a song that makes both today's speaker and I say, go blue. We're both graduates of the University of Michigan Law School and then went on to a very broad, much more broad career. And I look forward to sharing more about Anne in just a moment. But first wanted to share a few things about Stories Change Power. We are a nonprofit organization that believes deeply in the power of advocacy communications. And we know that many nonprofits take on huge problems with huge hearts and very small budgets. So we provide professional development to make sure that people can take advantage of the time, talent, funding, and opportunities that they have to engage in advocacy communications and create a more just, equitable, and peaceful world. We do that in four ways: through small cohorts for new and emerging professionals, for small cohorts for leadership who would like to create an environment that promotes effective advocacy communications, through one-on-one coaching, and through customized organizational trainings. If that's ever of interest to you and your organization, I'd love to connect more after the webinar and talk about how we can be of service. Today, I want to share, though, we're really going to dig into something that at Stories Change Power, we talk about collaboration as singing from the same choir sheet. And what we mean by that is bringing together all of our different parts and all of our different roles for a common mission. Today, we're going to dig in a bit deeper about how, in addition to those different parts and roles, there are different work styles, and how does that impact how we are collaborating as a team. We're going to be thinking a bit about our thinking, and specifically, you'll start to recognize the differences in work styles. You'll understand the impact that has on collaboration, including when problem A actually has also a problem B, and we'll embrace cognitive diversity in furtherance of your goal. To address all of this, I'm joined today by Anne Collier, who is the CEO of Arudia. Her mission is to guide personal and professional growth so that her clients can embody great leadership. After an 11-year career in law, she broadened her focus and has now spent more than 20 years providing services that are customized for clients' individual, team, and organizational needs, including workshops, trainings, and retreats. She is an expert leadership coach and uses a wide variety of assessment tools, including the one that we'll dig in today, the KAI, to help nonprofits, associations, governments, government entities, and other organizations meet their goals. So we're going to keep the chat open today for constructive conversation. If you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A, and we'll get to those where there's a Q&A session at the end of Anne's presentation. If we're not able to reach your question, then we will aim to find another way to connect with you and get you the answer and the information that you need. Four quick things before we dive into the content of today's webinar. One, as a webinar, you're off camera. So take advantage of whatever you need right now to really feel comfortable. If you'd like to move and stretch, we encourage you to do what you need to do. You can use the closed captions if those are helpful for you. If you have any tech difficulties, do not worry. We'll be sharing the recording after the webinar is complete. And this is also information that can serve you throughout your career. So I encourage you, just really take some space this Friday afternoon if you're on the East Coast, still a bit of morning if you're on the West, and focus in and be really present for all that we're going to share today. And with Anne, I will turn things over to you.
Wonderful. Let me share my screen here. Fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, it's always a pleasure to work with Piper, a fellow Michigan grad. And you can see my bio if you're interested. I actually come to this work after having practiced law for 11, as I like to say, very long years. And of real importance to me is improving culture, collaboration, and communication. And this is one of the ways that we do it, is helping people to understand their different thinking styles. So in terms of our agenda today, we're obviously going to talk about critical thinking skills, cognitive diversity, And then the specifics of different thinking styles, as well as coaching skills and how you can use coaching skills um, uh, to be more effective individually and more effective as a professional as you're working across different functioning teams. Outcomes, and Piper, I didn't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to the outcomes and what you saw for this, or if you wanted me to run right through them.
No, I'm happy to chime in. I mean, this is something that our webinar series is focused on folks in advocacy communications to have a robust and effective and rewarding career. Everyone is welcome to these webinars, but when we're looking at the folks who are in advocacy communications, I think it's really helpful where we'll see sometimes differences in work styles between those who are in communications and those who are not. So recognizing those differences, really understanding the impact those differences can have as we're collaborating to put research, to put policy recommendations, to put whatever it is that you're working on out into the world, and then really embracing that diversity in furtherance of and not as an obstacle to your advocacy goals.
And remember, we talked about like, all right, the relevance of this. So as Piper mentioned, I work with a lot of different groups and a lot of different goals. But Piper, I'd like you to just speak a little bit to some of the challenges and what you'd like people to have in the back of their mind or the front of their mind as we're going through the program.
Absolutely. And I would love, we'll put up a poll in just a moment to hear where everybody is in their career, but please feel free to pop things in the chat. I'd love to hear what's on your mind as you're listening to what we're talking about today, and just hear if how this resonates with you and your team. I think about when it comes to communications, the ultimate goal of our collective work, and that can look very different depending on where your perspective is in the organization, where as a research team, you may be focused on that research paper. As a policy person, you're focused specifically on, reaching one particular policymaker, and in communications, depending on the nature of your organization, you are looking at having everybody come together and activate your grassroots, for example. Thinking about then when is it best to begin working together. There's folks, and you'll see it that one of the blogs that we popped in the chat. If you take a McDonald's approach, it may be that your communications team doesn't hear about anything until it's almost time for that to go out in the world. So from your perspective, when is it best to begin working together as a communications team and more broadly? And then thinking about how much structure or more detail is really needed in order to get to the final goal, to get things out into the world. And I'll share more about that. But again, I'll be very curious if folks on the call, resonate as we talk about, the structure and the work styles that we need. But I see our poll is up, which is great. If there are other folks who would like to answer, we're really curious where you are in your career in communications or outside of communication. So we'll give that maybe another few seconds, and then this might be a good time. Let's go ahead and we'll end that and see. All right, so we've got a few folks who are new, a few folks who have been here a while, got a few pros on the call, so definitely all experience is welcome, and then a few folks who are outside of communication. So thank you, everybody. It's great to hear where you're coming from. And again, please don't be shy in the chat. We want to hear from you, and also in the Q&A and what's on your mind. But this is getting our thinking around what we're considering today as we look at this from a perspective of folks who are in the communication space.
And I'm actually, I'm not going to say I'm excited to see this, but do you ever sense tension at work between individuals or teams due to work styles? Okay, so glad that nobody said daily, but often, sometimes, and nobody said never. So, yeah, so, okay, so let's talk about what that tension comes from and give you some tools for sorting through that. All right, so, I'm going to start right now with, hold on a sec. I've got to find my clicker. There we go. With critical thinking skills. I have heard from many clients oops, I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. The magic of webinars and tech. I've heard from many clients that they are concerned about people having critical thinking skills. And we can talk about all the reasons for it, but let's actually dig into, what is the challenge, what are critical thinking skills? So I think of critical thinking as the intentional thinking in which a person systematically imposes criteria upon thinking. New information and considered focus results in the person's thinking evolving as the person evaluates the criteria and standards imposed. The person engages in metacognition, meaning that we're thinking about our thinking. This involves the very intentional and objective scrutinization of assumptions, perspectives, and biases. The skills necessary to think critically include the ability to distinguish, analyze, judge, and detect bias, to name a few. So I've known about Piper and her work for, oh my gosh, at least 15 years. And I know, and I've also worked a lot with public affairs and communications executives. All of these are skills and ways of thinking that are going to be very important to you. So what we're going to do today is give you some a way to think about your thinking so that you're more effective, both personally, but also as you interact with team members and with other teams. And I'm really passionate about this, and you'll figure out why in a little while. So when we think about a team, and I always like to start here, we're thinking about a team of people who have different skill sets, or teams that have different skill sets and different roles, right? And we focus on our own sort of collaborative approach. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how you harness diversity, meaning the different ways of thinking. So I'm showing you this corny picture of me and my family. So if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you've got something like this in your family archives. And really the point of the picture is to drive home the fact that we all try to fit in. We want to fit in. And when we don't, we notice. So I was probably about, I don't know, 8 or 9 when I realized that I was different than my entire family. And it took me another 20 years when I got Myers-Briggs certified for me to recognize that I was the only extrovert in a family of introverts. When I told my sister that, she said, "Yeah, I always knew you were different." So what does it mean when we're different? Well, let me go back again to my legal career, which started at the IRS, where I'll just tell you, I just did not fit in. And so when we're talking about not fitting in, or noticing that others don't fit in, what's really going on? It often feels a little bit like somebody speaking a different language to you. So if we were in the same room, I'd ask you if you've ever given instructions or received instructions and had no idea what people were talking about. So as Piper mentioned, we've got a lot of problem A's in the world that we're trying to deal with, trying to solve, but then problem B can get in the way. Problem A is the task at hand, and problem B is the stress that comes from working with people where it's just not working, right? Or trying to work with people where there's something happening. And usually it sounds something like this. Amanda is so frustrated with Mark because he's so sloppy with details. Or Ian, who's frustrated with Mark, who's so in the weeds. The point is that we all see things differently. So, take a look here. What do you see? Do you see the bunny? Do you see the rabbit? But note that you will see things differently than your colleagues, especially if they're on a different team, right? Because they've got different goals, different things that they need, different objectives. They have different problem A's, even though you've got joint problem A's as well. If we were in the same room, I'd give you a pair of fun glasses, and I'd ask you to look at a slide and add up numbers. So if you were wearing the blue glasses, you'd see that. If you were wearing the red glasses, you'd see that. And the point really is, with no glasses, is that we need the people around us to be able to see what we don't see, to add input, but then there's like some friction there. And the purpose of the work we're doing today, and why I hope that you decided to take an hour out of your afternoon to spend it with us, is to learn about the different approaches and how these different ways of thinking can really be how understanding that can make you a more effective professional. All right, so in thinking about thinking and thinking about problem solving, I want you to imagine that you're trying to develop a communication strategy, and you've got to work with other teams. So what does problem solving look like when it's working well, and what annoys you when it isn't? And I'm going to actually encourage you all to put whatever thoughts you have in the chat and share with each other, because it'll be some of the same thing, but it'll also be some different things. And so if you were to take the assessment that we're talking about, which is the Kirton Adaption Innovation Inventory, what you would notice is that people have problem-solving styles that are along this 100-point continuum of more adaptive to more innovative. Now, I'm going to stop you right there because more innovative is not the best. Wherever your problem solving is on this continuum is best for you. It's who you are. It's not how you try to approach things. It's just how you approach things. So we've got our more linear thinkers, very factual, these are over on the far left. Issues, what are the issues? What are the proposed solutions? Let's analyze this plan. Let's come up with a timeline, check in. And, obviously we all want diverse perspectives appreciated, but this group is very methodical. Now on the far right, where it's a little bit of orange tinge there, this is the group that wants to do things differently. Lots of ideas, brainstorming, a lot of flexibility. It's okay to say something wild and crazy, open to new ideas. And hey, what if we just started from scratch? They want people to take ownership, and they want their ideas accepted, and they want to accept the ideas of others. And then you've got, now this is a continuum. So, those 3 panels of descriptors are arbitrary. It's just because that's how much space I needed to fit all those words in. But the point is to recognize that middle panel is kind of a mix of both, right? Not totally structured and not totally unstructured. So if you were to take what's called the Kirton Adaption Innovation Inventory, you would get a score that was on that roughly 100-point continuum. And that score, and I again want to emphasize, it's not better to have a high score, but it would tell you what your problem solving style is. So why is this relevant? What does this mean? It's because at 10 points different, you start noticing differences in problem solving style. You got 100 points, and so you got a lot of potential for difference. You got people who are 30 or 40 or 50 points apart. Ooh, wow, that is a different approach. So let me give you some.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you go back for 1 second? Because I would love to hear from folks who are, just to give a chance. This is so much great information. And so thinking about where, if there's a couple words or, what's standing out to folks, or we'll just, let's jump into the poll here. So using what's on the screen and just a sense. So as you're reading all these things, are you somebody who really focuses more, like when we're starting a project, you need all the facts, or are you looking more for fresh ideas? Are you wanting to plan everything out, or are you looking more for some flexibility along the way? I mean, I can think of this from a communications perspective where I'll talk sometimes, and it's anybody who's worked with me probably won't be surprised to know where I am on the scale, but let's just throw everything at the wall, let's think really big and then come and narrow back down. So take a moment and just look at these different words, and then I'd love to hear from folks. We've got a few votes coming in, but where are you on on this KAI scale?
Yeah, and again, like, think about it in terms of, are you like most of the people you work with? Like, I'm kind of in the middle, I'm in the teal. Are you more structured? Do you like to just solve problems? Like, give me the constraints, let me figure it out within that set of constraints. Let me come up with a process. I hope everybody sticks with the process, because if they don't, that'll be bad. Or do you like to have more flexibility to do things differently?
Awesome. All right. And it looks like this is going to be interesting because we've got quite a variety. We've got folks in the middle, a few more folks, and this maybe doesn't surprise me too much with communicators on the call, with more flexibility, and then folks who are focused more, feeling more adaptive and a bit more structured. So thank you. And again, as you've got thoughts along the way, please pop those in the chat, or questions in the Q&A. So thanks, Anne.
Yeah. And actually, So just remember, keep it in your mind that more people who are more flexible, because we're going to look at that, like what's the rest of the world look like in a moment. But before we do that, I want to just go over some definitions. And what I'm going to do is share a handout with Piper that she can send out to everybody after the program. So style, your problem solving style is how you prefer to solve problems, not how well. More adaptive means that you prefer to solve problems associated with a more consensually agreed upon structure. More innovative means that a person prefers to solve problems with less structure and are less concerned that the structure be consensually agreed upon. Remember, problem A is the problem you need to solve. Problem B is the friction that can arise, doesn't have to, but can arise between colleagues of differing styles. Creativity is the generation of a novel idea as part of problem solving, and novel is just new and original. So I want to really drive home the point that that I know incredibly creative, adaptive problem solvers, right? So it's not about being more innovative, like it's better. That's kind of like the in word with Elon Musk and all of that these days. But really, everybody on this call is creative. You're just creative differently, as we saw from the poll. So again, understanding creativity. Level is how creative you are. Style is how you are creative. Now, style is not related to, as I just said, intelligence, seniority or experience, where you come from, skills or qualifications, or motivation. Now, I want to take a look at this team, and what you'll notice here is a bell curve. And actually, Piper, I'd love to have your comments on this as well, because you've worked with so many different teams. So this bell curve represents the population in countries. I think Asian countries might be the mean might be a little bit lower, but for the most part, the mean across the world is 95. And what you see here is a bell curve. So there's an even distribution. Most people are in the middle of that bell curve. So 68% of people are within one standard deviation of the mean of 95, and 95% of people are within two standard deviations, which is 95, or which is between 59 and 131. Now I'm even outside, I'm higher than that 131. So it's kind of this was like groundbreaking for me to realize why I was so different. So if you've ever had that question, like, why am I so different? You might be really adaptive. You might be a high adapter or a high innovator, or it may just be that the people you're around are different than you, right? Or you're different than them, whatever your perspective is. But what's interesting to me about that poll is more people saw themselves as more adaptive or more innovative. When we do this, and we do a lot of, we have our leadership academy. When we do this as a leadership academy, and we do polling, and I do this, at conferences and programs like this, am I pretty similar to people? Am I more structured or more innovative? It comes out as a bell curve. So I find it really interesting. And I think it's, significant that this group of professionals are more innovative. So Piper, I kind of like your take on that.
Well, I love what you're saying about how first the relativity of it, how depending on the team you're in, you may find yourself feeling like you're incredibly innovative. And then if you're with folks who are even further out, closer to that 145, it may be you feel yourself in a, shifting into a different role. And so having both the understanding of where we are along that curve and then where we are in relation to a team makes a lot of sense. And then thinking of it from a communications perspective, and I say that knowing there are folks who are more in the policy side or more specifically with government relations roles or analysis on the call. And so I'm curious to hear some of the experiences you've had, but I've found it can go a couple ways where you may have very different styles and each team ends up feeling a bit like nails on a chalkboard to the other. And then another way to go is when you recognize, we've got different strengths, we've got different approaches. How do we work with those together? And so you can have the folks who are wanting to be new and innovative combined with the folks who are going to be keeping a very close eye on the project management, on the timelines. And it can be incredibly helpful when you understand the strengths and put those together. But that's my take. Is I look at this and I love the bell curve average, but then knowing where we are in relation to the folks that we're working with.
Yeah. And I want to actually add something here too. Okay, so this is what we call the consensus group. So the consensus group is the mean of the group. So in this case, it's basically about 91 plus or minus 10 points. So again, Piper, I'm curious, with all of your experience working in comms, have you noticed when and you've worked with teams long term, what do you notice, like there's certain people that once you get them on board, and I don't mean this as a rhetorical question, because under the theory, if you can get that consensus group bought into your project or your approach, everybody else will follow. And actually, this is a team that I've worked with. And here's the thing: is the CEO is Matt at 108. Notice he's outside the consensus group, so that has some implications. Like he's more innovative. So like I know he changed a lot. He did a lot at that organization. And then, but not everybody was on board, and not everybody, was supportive, frankly, of the leadership coaching that we were doing there and the leadership training. We don't want to spend the money. It's not worthwhile. People should just figure it out, all the excuses you hear. But I'm curious about what you've noticed about, and I say this a little bit in air quotes, like the consensus group,
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And I've seen it both in organizations where I've been a full-time member of the team and also where I've been consulting. And it's helpful with this framework. I haven't always had this lens to look through. So you have kind of a general sense of who the consensus group may be, who you need to have on board. But it feels even more focused having this lens to see everything through, where it's coming from, why are they the ones you need on board, and seeing it as the work styles that we're bringing in can be incredibly helpful. And so along with that, I think about the language that we use, where there can be ideas, and I'd love in the chat, give me a thumbs up if you've ever had this happen, where you're explaining something and you feel like you've said it the same way, 5 times, and then it's the 6th where people finally say, "Oh yes, we're on board with that." And it's sometimes just a different language that we're using. Maybe we're far on the innovative side and speaking in terms like bringing in our colleagues that are a bit more adaptive can shift the reactions. Even if we think we're saying the same thing, a slightly different approach can really have a different impact. So curious if that resonates. And Anne, how does that land with you?
Oh my gosh. Well, all right. So I just want to tell you, it's so funny. Cynthia, my dear colleague and friend, and I sometimes we work together to coach a client. So I'm way on the innovative end. She is much closer to the mean, and we're coaching a client whose KAI is 83. So Cynthia is much closer in her style, but I've done the work with the client and with the team. So we just had some follow-up coaching. And so I said, I said, well, you could try this. And the client said, I don't understand. And Cynthia then explained it. And I'm literally, I felt like I heard the exact same thing that I said, but apparently it resonated with the client. And she's like, oh, okay, I get it. And so I said something to Cynthia afterwards. I said, I think we said the same thing. And Cynthia just said, I think it's a case of I don't speak French. So that's become our new shorthand, that we both like France. We both really like France and French food and everything. So we kind of chuckle about that too. But the point really being, maybe sometimes it's a case of I don't speak Mongolian, right? Where it's really, really different. So I think your point about like knowing your team and bringing in, like, hey, I know I'm really adaptive. Maybe I should bring in one of my colleagues that's more in the middle, because I'm not sure I'm going to answer. I'll hear the questions, but I'm not sure I'm going to answer the questions in a way that is going to really land and connect. Your whole point is to connect, right? And then we haven't even talked about the broader, like if you're in communications, how do you make sure that the messaging, works all across the continuum, right? So I mean that's like a whole nother program, but let's actually focus for a moment on like kind of the stress of working outside your kind of your preference, right? So we all do it. We all do what's called coping. Coping takes a lot of energy. And what I mean by coping is like, hey, let's say that your score is 100, but you're doing a bunch of tasks that are kind of KAI, 50. And let's say you have to do it over a long period of time. That is also territory, right? But you do them, you do them if you have to. Doing things that are outside your kind of your band of comfort, like where you prefer to work over a short period of time, is generally not a big deal, but it's sort of that sustain. And I can really speak to that, as a tax lawyer. I mean, there's a reason that I left that. It was just not feeding my soul. It was just not within my kind of my sweet spot of what I like to do and the way that I like to be creative. So there can be a cognitive gap. So remember what I said about at 10 points, you start to notice there's a difference. At 20 points, you notice there's a little bit of a difference for sure. And then at 30 points or above, there's a big difference. So think about tasks that way, recognizing that, and we do a lot of career coaching, that you want to try to, for your own well-being and satisfaction, you want to be trying to find something that where you're using your skills in the way that you like to use them. Also notice you can have a cognitive gap between a person and a team. So I tend to like to think about this as like sometimes the CFO is really different than the rest of the team, depends on the organization. So think about if your role as a comms person is really different. And this is true whether you're internal or you're in a consultant role. Is your role really different than what the bread and butter of the organization or the team that you're working with? And then here's the thing that I find just absolutely fascinating. And that is that, at 5 points difference between teams, so the mean of the team, you can get problem Bs arising. And that, again, that problem B is the friction that I don't understand it. I'm not bought into your strategy, that kind of thing.
Strikes me, Ann, too, is in thinking about this, when we're talking about especially the smaller nonprofits who are working on really big issues on small budgets, sometimes small teams, everything, it's just every moment matters. When you've got these differences in approaches, it can be extra frustrating because you feel like you don't have the time to be coordinating or repeating yourself, or and let me, sorry, to complete that thought, you don't have the time to coordinate beyond what you feel like is really needed given your style. And so when it feels like there's extra levels of stress or extra work that's going on, that friction internally that doesn't translate to the mission you're working on externally, it feels like that's even more intense of frustration. So I'm picturing your coping, the car there, it can put people higher along that curve. Because we're in environments where we care so deeply about the causes we're working on, and just don't have the time or the money to waste.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that would be a whole nother program on managing your stress and what we call your shadow side, but that is exactly right.
We do talk about keeping our batteries all charged in Stories Change Power, but yes, all the reasons in there.
Yeah. So I'm going to play a very, very short video. And Piper, if you could like just put in the chat, or if somebody can put in the chat that you can hear the sound. I just like confirmation. I don't want to just play the visual only. So, all right, so
I'll do that. And then also for folks on the call, if we can get a sounds good when this is going, that would be helpful.
Oh yeah, that'd be fabulous. All right.
Flat pack furniture, a new measure of personality. What's your problem-solving style? Meet Claire. Claire received her flat pack table and chairs yesterday, and she is so excited. So Claire has set aside this afternoon to put it together. She's got herself ready in practical clothing and finds her toolkit. First, Claire locates the instructions and reads them all through carefully, noting what order things are going to be done in and what equipment she needs. Next, she opens the box and puts the parts in the order she will need them, keeping the instructions to hand for regular reference. Claire makes each of the chairs first, ensuring they're stable, well secured, and all the parts have been used. Now she moves on to the table. Everything is going to plan. Claire is very happy and is seeing washy ropes. 1 hour later, she's able to have a lovely cup of tea sitting at her new table and chairs. Claire is very pleased with her afternoon's work. Claire has a more adaptive problem-solving style. She likes things organised and tidy, and she prefers to work in a structured, efficient and methodical way. She is great at getting things done quickly, accurately, and with the minimum of fuss. Now, let's meet Claire's friend, Tallulah. Tallulah has just come back from a cocktail party. It's been great fun, and the drinks were interesting and rather tasty. She sees her flat pack furniture has arrived during the day. How exciting, she just can't wait. Tallulah grabs a glass of red wine, kicks off her shoes and opens the box. She's going to make her table and chair right now. Tallulah has made a bit of a mess, but that won't matter. Tallulah's view on flat pack furniture is that it should be obvious how to put it together, so she isn't too worried when she can't find the instructions immediately. Let's get going, she thinks. Oh, the phone's rung. It's her best friend, Tabitha. They have a right old chinwag. Now she's hung up. Let's get back to it. It's rather late now, but Tallulah would really like to see the results of her labour today. She's had an idea. Although a table and chairs was what she planned, maybe
I think we lost the sound, Anne.
and
Oops,
Tallulah
there we
toddles
go.
off to bed. The next morning, her partner, Peter, isn't quite so
Here. So where do I need to go back to?
Oh, it was just for a moment. I think we're set.
with
Yeah.
a matching card table.
Okay,
That would be
I don't know what
so
happened.
cool. By 1 a.m., it's all finished, and Tallulah toddles off to bed. The next morning, her partner, Peter, isn't quite so sure about her inventive new design. Where is he going to sit to eat his breakfast? Now, Tallulah has an innovative problem-solving style. This means she isn't always conventional in her approach to things. Although Peter doesn't have anywhere to sit, they do now have somewhere to store her books, which was a problem before. Tallulah is great at solving problems which don't have an off-the-shelf solution. She finds life exciting, interesting and fun, although Claire thinks she's a bit risky. Tallulah thinks Claire should loosen up a little bit and enjoy being spontaneous once in a while. Despite their differences, they're good friends, but they just have a slightly different approach to life. What's your problem-solving style? Are you more like Claire or more like Tallulah, or perhaps somewhere in between? To find out more,
All right. To find out more, you can reach out to me or go to the KAI website. All right. So curious if anybody particularly related to Claire or Tallulah or knows people who are like Claire or Tallulah. You can just put your comments in the
Yeah,
chat.
I'd love to hear how folks what thoughts are. And I think sometimes I'm somewhere in the middle. There's part of me that wants to jump right over the instructions. I don't know that I ever make something that isn't the way it was supposed to be in the box, or at least not intentionally. And I do know that I'd love to start using the term or the expression chin wag. rather than
Yes,
chin.
yes. When Piper and I get on the phone, we have a right old chin wag.
That's exactly right.
All right, so here's the thing. Let's talk about change, because I also think that there's a misperception that change is in the in the jurisdiction solely of the more innovative, but truly change. Everybody likes change. Everybody deals with change, but it's the kind of change that they like, right? So the more adaptive, think about making things better, driving down the cost of operations, improved in efficiency, defining data metrics, exact metrics, revitalizing systems, instituting standard operating procedures. The more innovative, it's about doing things different. Like, oh, I'm bored with this, or I came up with, here's something that came up at the KAI symposium, which was over the last couple of days. Like, the more innovative people want to, we need structure, but we have a hard time sticking with our way of doing things and staying organized. So think about being innovative, finding a new way to reach audiences, maybe even finding new audiences, finding unexpected channels and platforms, adopting a new technology, changing to a new system. And that just discontinuous novelty is actually about like, oh, you know what? I woke up and, or I was out for a run and I had this idea. And it has nothing to do with anything else. It just popped into my head. The point here is that you are creative. Everybody is creative. You're just creative differently. So to pick up on that point about self-perception, so we have this little guy here who's, he's kind of a little bit on the innovative end, but feels like he's in the middle. I'm like not innovative or adaptive. But then if the people around him are all more innovative, then he's going to be the most adaptive person. And in fact, to Piper's earlier point, maybe taking on a role and doing some things that are more adaptive because he's the most adaptive, most capable person. And then, of course, the converse is true. He could actually be the most innovative person. Now, he hasn't changed at all, but the people around him have. So I'd like you to think about and even put in the chat, what are some of the problem Bs that you have experienced or ongoingly experience?
And it sounds like a couple folks are not able to access the chat. So that might be, I will be
Okay.
triple checking all of our settings after the webinar. But for now, please just disregard the Q&A, and we'd love chat there, or disregard that it needs to be just for questions. We will repurpose it as a chat. So if there are problem Bs that you experience and you're able to put that in the Q&A, then we'd love to hear from you, or if the chat is open for folks, that is also an option. But yeah, hearing about some problem Bs. One that I can think of is the notion of a timeline, and how, when you've got so many things moving, again, with many small nonprofits, and I've seen this firsthand, both in full-time roles and consulting, where there's just so much going on that trying to coordinate all of it is tricky, where you have someone who may try to get something to you on a Tuesday, but it ends up being Friday. And so all the coordination along the way becomes a problem B, in addition to what it is that we're working to create along that timeline.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what I would say is like, is the timeline like, okay, is Tuesday really Tuesday, or is it like sometime midweek? I mean, that's something that comes up, and differences about when, how exact that is, or what needs to happen.
Yeah, and I'll see
that
folks be, very like needing something that exact morning, because they've planned in different work blocks. And I think a lot of folks in the communication side may, depending on your role, there's times where you may set out your entire day thinking that's what you're going to do, and something changes. You've got a bill coming through Congress that's unexpectedly introduced, or you have 10 media calls because something happened. And so everything really shifts, and that's a very different focus, or a different approach rather, than if you have time that you have no distractions, you can just put your head down and get things done. So you need a colleague to have something in your inbox by a particular time for you to do that. So yeah, so let's see. And it looks like, thank you so much to our tech support, that the chat settings should be reset. So if folks are able to weigh in, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. So let's actually keep moving. There's so much to this. I mean, generally, this is a half-day program. Let's just talk a little bit about structure, because we all need structure in our daily lives. And the paradox of structure. The paradox of structure is the seemingly incongruent notion that structure enables problem solving or enables solutions, but also limits the kind of solutions you can find. So I've used that picture of the house framed out because I love the idea of like, yeah, that provides a housing solution. You know where the 3 bedrooms are? It's a ranch, maybe it has a loft. But if you want something different to solve your housing problem, you may have to change that structure, that way of doing things. So it's, this sort of age-old solving the problem in the box, or think about it as without changing the environment versus, changing the environment, looking at solutions in ways that are not contemplated by the current way of doing things. Part of the point here is that we actually need to have structure in our lives, even if we're just talking about knowing that something's wrong. You know, hey, we're not communicating with people, or there was a disconnect, or, you know, that kind of thing. So when we look at problem solving, you know, again, it's like solving problem using the structure, or from my perspective, solving problem despite the structure. And that might be better versus different. If you remember that slide with the different types of problem solvings. But the basic idea is that the key difference is, do you see structure as enabling or positive, or as limiting? And the key difference is how do we see it differently? And how do we manage or mismanage this paradox? So I want to go a little bit deeper into thinking about our thinking, and we have like about 12 minutes left. So I'm gonna, I may skip over a couple of the slides, but this is absolutely critical. So our problem solving style includes 3 components: idea generation, methodology, and rule group conformity. So again, in thinking about how we think, you know, think about differences in brainstorming style. Think about when you're in a meeting and, you know, who's wasting time. It can be, oh, you're wasting time, you're too in the weeds, or you're wasting time, you're giving us all sorts of impractical ideas. But the point is that depending on where you are in the continuum, you know, you're going to have a different way of producing ideas. So one thing that's key to remember about brainstorming styles: the more adaptive a person is, the more likely their idea will work, because they're not going to be changing anything that's in the structure. The more innovative they are, you know, most of the ideas won't get off. As Piper said, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. What sticks, most of them won't get off the drawing board. I'd also say, and I love this picture and this conceptualization of the different problem solving styles, and that is that when you're talking about a problem, the more adaptive will tend to see what doesn't work, and the more innovative will see what does work. It's just a question of focus. So for example, we went through a rebranding about a year ago, and if you look at the logo in the lower right-hand corner, Cynthia and I both really liked the logo, but the first thing she says was, well, I think that you know, the orange band is too big and maybe a different font. The thing I said was like, oh, I love it. But the thing is we had the same opinion about the logo. It's just what we focused on first. So keep that in mind. Critical thinking, you know, seeing the mess in the pattern isn't criticism intended to derail. It's actually criticism intended to help. And that gets us to method of operation, which is, if you take the KI, will be your efficiency score, which is a term of art. It's not really whether you're efficient, but again, it's how you prefer to operate. So people are more adaptive, you know, prefer to have, they're precise, reliable, thorough. They like a plan, and they like backup plans. The more innovative prefer to think tangentially, welcome changes, a mold breaker. Well, you know, hey, if solving the problem doesn't work this way, let's try it a different way. Tend to take an emergent planning approach. I wanted, oh, forgot about this. I jumped ahead in my mind. So an example here is this idea of, and this is why it's so valuable to really be thoughtful about engaging people. And that is this idea of, you know, back in the, by way of example that I stole from one of my KAI colleagues, is that back in the 1800s, goods were brought to America in sailing ships. And then some innovative engineer said, hey, we should use steamships, except for that the fuel weighed so much that many of the steamships sunk, which is not good, obviously. And so it took an adaptive engineer to figure out how to, within the constraints of how much space do we need for goods, how much space can we have for the fuel, weight, that sort of thing, to figure out how to make that all work. So just remember, I mean, again, like, it's so valuable to appreciate and be curious about different problem solving styles. Now, when we look at the last component of the KAI, this is rule group conformity. So the basic idea is like, how driven are you to follow the rules and pay attention to group norms, or not, if you're on the innovative end. What I would say is that the more adaptive are really good at figuring out what the unsaid rules are. They avoid conflict. The more innovative, just like Tallulah, may skip, eliminate steps, less bothered by what that, IKEA package said we were supposed to do. And are willing to, and can be seen as challenging, which can be problematic for them, depending on, it's the walking into the CEO's office and saying, this is not working, that kind of thing. And again, like, I just want to focus a little bit on misperceptions because, Piper mentioned being under stress. And when we're under stress, we tend to, it's just natural. We get frustrated, blame others. But here's the thing to remember is that people under stress can often view the problem-solving style of others not as a benefit, but as annoying. So again, like, the high adapters perceiving the high innovators as abrasive, unsound, impractical, all of these things like they're bad. And again, the high innovators are perceiving high adapters as picky, compliant, predictable, and overly cautious. Again, like that's a bad thing. So notice if you're having judgment, try to take a step back and ask yourself, how is this a benefit? That'll really help you. So and again, I'm going to give Piper an article that I wrote that gives you 7 tips for improving your critical thinking skills. I would say one of the most important things is to deal with distractions, actually set aside some time to think critically and to embrace the idea that there are different approaches. And the question is, when there are different approaches and people are seeing things differently, what do you do? And what I would say is that if you can adopt a curious mindset, there's my cat Greta helping us out there. That is absolutely critical. And what we've got here is a little bit of exposure to our coaching model. Now, that is a problem-solving model. What makes it coaching is that you're asking open-ended questions, and you're getting the other person to share their insights, to have insights, to share them. You're understanding what might be in the way of you implementing a particular communication strategy. And so when we do our Leadership Academy or with coaching clients, we have our coaching model, but on the flip side, we have these cards, we have sample questions. So I want to I'm about to wrap up, and we actually do have time for some questions, but consider, what the ultimate goal of your collective work is, when it's best working together. We started with these questions, in fact, and how much detail or structure is really needed. So notice actually, if you think of yourself as being more innovative, that your judgment about that is going to be different than most of the other people that you work with. So if you can approach people understanding that they may have different needs around structure, you're going to be able to work more effectively with them. And you need those different problem-solving styles because most problems have aspects of that problem that are all up and down that continuum. And so you need everybody's input. And the key is to not mistake different problem-solving styles as a lack of ability. You wouldn't expect, Greta and our little puppy over there to perform the same tasks. So I'd like to encourage questions, but also share with you that, we have our Leadership Academy, and that which starts next core training starts April 11th, and we're offering a discount code of FRIENDS15 off for special pricing. If you're in need of, we also work a lot with nonprofits. So if you want nonprofit pricing or a scholarship, just email us at anncollier@arudia.com. All right, Piper, what questions or insights do you have?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne. And I encourage folks, we've got a few minutes, and I will give priority to your questions when you pop those in the Q&A, and we'll be following up with the recording and all the resources that Anne mentioned. I'd love to start, as I mentioned earlier, Stories Change Power. One of our key focus areas is building bridges. And quite often we talk about that more in the social context, but it really strikes me here where this work is building a lot of bridges within a team. And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more to that and the impact that you've seen in working with people where when they better understand this, what are some of the results that you've seen within organizations?
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's the thing, and I'm just going to go back in my slides for a moment because I want to focus in on that slide of the annoyances. So whether it's in your team or, working with another team, being able to transform your annoyance to appreciation, that transforms your relationship. You also, and it reduces your stress. So you start working together, projects go more smoothly. People are asking each other questions. Like I might say, hey, Piper, so tell me, what about this is important to you? Because so part of it, there's a little bit of humility too, just sort of saying like, hey, I may not understand this whole thing. That's okay. That's why we have a team here, which by the way, that is sometimes difficult in organizations where apologies are not, for example, I was just talking to a client about that. They're not, if you apologize, you feel like you're saying you did something wrong and you might get fired, which is not good.
No. Well, and I'm reminded there was a wonderful event just 2 days ago at the National Cathedral, bringing folks together about bridging divides. And I'll include that in the resources as well. But what really strikes me is how whether we're talking on a nationwide scale or individual within a team, it's a lot about listening and really being open and approaching folks with curiosity. So I will leave us. We're right at time now. On that note, any questions, please follow up with us. We'll be in touch. There will be a quick 2-question survey when you click off. Please be a helper and let us know your feedback there. Have a wonderful weekend. Be well, do good, and tune in to our next webinar. We'll be in touch on that in March. We're diving into political ideology. So thank you everybody for joining today, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.